Good morning, welcome to Croppersburn and welcome to this virtual forage that we're going to do together. We're going to have a walk around this amazing site that's really handy to all of us hopefully, and we're going to try and discover at least 10 edible items, and I'm going to talk you through how to identify them and also talk about how to use them as well. So we are in early spring really. I mean, I know it's kind of coming into the middle of March now, but in this country things don't really start to kick in really until the end of March. So there is this window of opportunity at this time to pick out things that you can only find at that kind of like crossover time between winter coming to an end and spring starting, and this is one of them, and this is kind of a bit more unusual and maybe something you haven't tried before. So you probably recognize this as bramble or blackberry, one of our kind of most common kind of crazy weeds that grow absolutely everywhere, as you know, in our parks, on our shorelines, in our hedgerows. Bramble, rubus is the family name, is absolutely everywhere, so a really common one. Yes, we know it from this kind of quite distinctive kind of thick vine, and then these kind of quite treacherous thorns here. So you will notice on here that on this particular one I'm holding up, this is last year's growth, this is this year's growth, and this is what we're going to be talking about. So these little shoots are the new leaves of the kind of future bramble. This is the new bramble growing here, the new stem, and these are what we're going to collect to eat. So these are definitely unusual, very small window forage, but they're one I really recommend trying. So they're eaten raw, just on the go. They're not something I would ever really gather to make a recipe from. This is definitely one that I would just take and eat as I'm walking around, and there's lots of nice things like that. But they're also excellent in tea, so you can see very easily you can gather lots of them really quickly. Obviously be aware of these kind of spiny bits. Grab it from the edge, or even better, use a pair of scissors and kind of pluck them off like that. Their flavour is really unusual, and it's definitely nutty, in fact almost like almondy. Like I've even had ones where they taste nearly like marzipan, but different people pick up different things from them, but they're not bitter at all. Like I say, make an excellent tea, but also just like a really nice forager snack, and incredibly abundant as well. We are looking at one of my favourite plants now next. This is sorrel. So this is one of our most common weeds. You will find it growing in multiple types of environments. At Croppersburn here, it actually likes to grow in a big patch along the seaside, and I'm going to put a wee pin drop on the map I'll send you and show you exactly where I found it in case you're struggling to find this one, because from a distance it's kind of indistinct. So sorrel is a member of the dock family, and at a glance, if you're not familiar with it, you might actually think that this is the common dock or the broadleaf dock that we are mostly familiar with for rubbing on our nettle stings. This is a slightly different species but within the same family. So identifying sorrel is actually pretty easy. It likes to grow in a rosette, so you'll very often find it growing in little patches where there's lots and lots of leaves coming out together. It has this lovely kind of simple leaf shape, so elongated, kind of lovely bright green, especially when it's young at this time of year. In fact, I have an even younger piece here in my basket. So this is an even younger one growing here, so really small and fine. So this grows pretty much all year round. I find it here, you know, in the dead of winter as well, which is really helpful to know as a forager, to find those kind of like fresh greens. Even when the season seems kind of dead, you'll usually find sorrel. So identifying it, like I say, this kind of simple leaf shape, beautiful and green, should feel like a little bit kind of fleshy, succulent almost, and then it has these kind of feet or tails on it, so two little points at the bottom of the leaf. That is your big indicator for sorrel. There are a few other plants that have this kind of set of tails coming from it. So one of them is spinach, another one is sea beet, has kind of an almost arrow shape like that as well. But one to be really aware of, and we're going to talk about it later, is arum. So we'll go through the differences with it as well at one point. talk about flavour. So sorrel, like I said, it's one of my favourites. I can find it at all times of year, but I especially love it for its lovely sour, bright, acidic green apple, rhubarb kind of flavour. So really bright, like I say, slightly sour. So it makes an amazing addition to salads, and that's best how I would use it. So just kind of throw it in as it is, especially if you can find it nice and young. This is kind of ideal stage for sorrel, really tender and young, and should have that lovely bright flavour. The next plant we're talking about is one I mentioned back when we talked about sorrel. This is arum. So this is called actually arum maculatum. Arum maculatum means marked. So sometimes you'll find this with kind of spots on it as well. But that is not your only way of identifying it. It's really important to know and be aware of arum. It is a springtime plant that comes up the same time as our sorrel and our wild garlic and a few other plants. And it's definitely not one that you want to confuse with those plants. It will have a very unpleasant reaction. So the problem with arum is that when it's young, it looks like this. So if you think if we were talking about our sorrel, it has, you know, that kind of simple leaf shape. It has tails, as you can say, as I was saying before. So not as kind of distinct as the ones on the sorrel, but definitely like little tails on there. And so if I hold these up next to each other, this is our sorrel, this is our arum. You can see how you might at a glance go, oh, that's sorrel, that's what Claire was talking about. I'm going to grab some of that for my salad. You don't want to eat this. Arum has a compound in it, while not poisonous, so it won't poison you, it won't kill you, but it will give you a really unpleasant burn in your mouth and in your throat, almost like pins and needles, so you definitely don't want to eat this. When it gets bigger, it's way easier to differentiate it, so it gets kind of more of a rounder appearance, much broader, and kind of these kind of tails get really big, so you would never mix it up with it. But at this stage it is trickier, so if you're looking for sorrel and you see something that looks like sorrel, there is a way of picking it out. So there is a vein that runs around the outside of arum leaves, which is really distinctive, that you won't find on wild garlic leaves or on sorrel leaves. So I'm going to include a picture in this video as well that shows it really well, but that's your way of picking them out, so just be aware of that. You definitely don't want to eat your arum in place of your sorrel or your wild garlic, so be careful when you're picking. The next thing we're talking about is this. This is sea radish. So one of our wild brassicas. We have loads of wild brassicas growing in Ireland. They're all edible, various degrees of deliciousness by far. This one is incredibly divisive for me on the kind of scale of deliciousness. This is way up there. This is probably like number 8 because I love the flavour of sea radish. But some people absolutely hate this. If you're not a radish or kind of mustardy fan, you're probably not going to be the biggest fan of sea radish. But I do encourage you to try it, because on our coastlines this one is incredibly abundant, incredibly common and incredibly good for you as well. Sea radish is really easy. So sea radish, so that's radish by the sea. And there's lots of sea plants that kind of have a common name that is prefixed with sea, and it's really kind of useful as a forager, these kind of like descriptor names. So sea radish, so which prefers to be beside the sea, but you'll find it inland sometimes, and you'll also find like a land version of kind of a wild radish or wild brassica, which is quite similar in appearance as well. But if you're by the sea and it looks like this, you've got sea radish. So these kind of like quite distinct stems, kind of blushing a little bit pinky red, then these opposite leaves the whole way up, and then a different leaf at the top. So really distinctive. This is a nice time to pick them if you want to eat it as a green or as like a stir fry. If you'd like that kind of strong flavour, pick it this time, toss it into a stir fry and cook it up. I would take the kind of tough stem out first and then just strip off these leaves, just as you would like kale or something, or cabbage or something like that. Give them a wee chop, toss them up. Great fill-in for lots of things. Anywhere you'd use cabbage, make fabulous colcannon as well, again if you like that kind of strong mustardy flavour. I like the leaves and I do pick them, but the best thing to collect from sea radish is actually the flowers and the seed pods. So we're at the wrong end of the year to collect those. The flowers will obviously start to come out kind of in the summertime, but do look out for them. They're really distinctive. They have 4 petals. And they're bright yellow, and you'll see a huge abundance of them on all of our shorelines, not just at Crawfordsburn, but heading out to Grimsport and travelling down the coast of North Down. You'll see it everywhere. The flowers have the most amazing flavour, so they have that wasabi kick as well, but they also have a little bit of sweetness. And then the seed pods, the young seed pods almost look like little pea pods, or maybe even like little caterpillars or something like that. They're super cute. I'll try and include an image of them so you know how to identify them. But when they're young, they have the most amazing flavour too. So again, mustardy, wasabi, punchy flavour, but also like sweet and crunchy and delicious. Like one of my favourite things by far. Worth remembering, it's not something I've mentioned already. So I talked about radish, and we always think of radish of it being a root. This does have a root, but it's really important to remember that it's actually illegal to uproot plants without permission of the landowner. So certainly if you're able to get permission at Crawfordsburn to dig up some sea radish, work away. I kind of stick to the kind of system of not uprooting anything if it's not on my own patch. So I will uproot things from my garden, and I'm very lucky that people will uproot things from their garden for me, so like dandelions and things like that, different kinds of roots. In the kind of wild, in this environment, I try to leave things be, because every time you remove a plant, you're kind of affecting the ecosystem around it. So stick with the leaves, stick with the flowers and the seed pods. Those are all delicious and ones that you want to collect anyway. So I just talked about sea radish, and we were just walking back towards the shoreline again there, and I found a sea radish that had actually uprooted itself, so I thought it might be interesting to see this. So this is the radish root. It's quite like a parsnip or something like that, so really kind of like elongated and pale. These are edible as well, but they're kind of known for being quite tough. But I've actually never tried it before, so I'm going to take a little piece of it and see what it's like, and I will talk about it at the end of the video if you're interested. Talk about is the one that everybody wants this time of year. We're in the middle of March, and it is prime wild garlic season. So at Crawfordsburn, there's quite a few places that you can collect it from, which is wonderful. But there's one really significant patch which is quite near the car park. Again, it'll be on the wee map that I'm going to send you in case you're not able to find it. But you will find wild garlic in lots of places at this time of year, in Belfast and outside of the city. It likes to grow kind of in a place where it has lots of tree cover. It needs like kind of damp ground, and a lot of people say wild garlic likes to grow where ancient woodland is. Now that's not always necessarily true, but that is a good place to start. So if you're looking for wild garlic, look for kind of established woodland with a wee bit of age to it, somewhere where it's a bit damp, somewhere where it has a bit of cover, because it does prefer to have kind of close quarters with trees. So how to know that it's wild garlic when you're picking it? So the number one way to tell, and we'll talk about three-cornered leek in the same way, is by smell. So if you're in a patch of wild garlic and you're walking through, that kind of fresh oniony smell will hit you immediately. There will be no doubt in it. And then to be secondly sure is to identify it by its kind of characteristics. So I'm in kind of a path of wild garlic here, and there's loads of it here. It's really healthy. It's at a really nice stage. It's still quite young. And these are our leaves here. So simple leaf shape, just kind of elongated, pointed at the top, just kind of a single rib of a vein through the middle. Beautiful kind of pale green colour when it's young like this. But that crush, if I crush this up and smell it, like immediately you'll know you've picked the right thing. Nothing else really smells like that. Wild garlic's not specifically just garlic. It has kind of a herbal smell. It has like a scalliony smell. It's much more interesting, I think, actually, than kind of fresh, the conventional garlic that we're used to. So picking wild garlic, it's really important to be sustainable, because everybody wants wild garlic. So if you come to this patch, do come with a plan, you know, so come and pick as much as you need. Do not be tempted to harvest loads and loads of it, because it is kind of a precious commodity. The reason for that being is it takes a long time for wild garlic to establish, so it grows very slowly at a small kind of pace every year, so you want to only just take as much as you need. You also don't want to uproot, so we already talked about kind of uprooting plants. You want to avoid that because one, it's against the law, but in the case of wild garlic as well, you're preventing kind of next year's plants being established too. And the third reason why you want to be careful as well when you're picking this is not to confuse it with something else. So we already talked about arum. This is it growing just beside the wild garlic here. So we talked about it confusing it with sorrel, but here we want to be aware of arum because it likes to grow exactly where wild garlic grows. So when you're picking wild garlic, I like to use a knife or a pair of scissors. Go along and you want to collect each leaf individually. Now that sounds kind of mad, but you only really need, if you want to make this for pesto or something like that, you only really need a handful. Like a big handful bunch will take you, in a patch like this or in any other abundant patch, will take you just a couple of minutes. So pick individually, and that way you can be really sure that you're not collecting arum or something else like lily of the valley or some other plant that might look like this as well. You know, at this time of year, you've got to think about bluebells and daffodils and things like that. They like to grow in the same patches too. So using wild garlic, pesto is classic, and you can't really go too far wrong with it. You know, it kind of comes out across my Instagram every year. Everyone is making wild garlic pesto, but it is for a reason. It's really delicious, and it's amazing on pasta and on pizza, and just spread on a bit of crusty bread. It is like really incredibly delicious. But you can use it in any way. You can use a herb. It's awesome in champ. It's amazing fermented, and I can talk more about the process of fermenting wild garlic if anybody's interested at the end of the video. And it's just like incredibly versatile as well. So anyway, you would use scallions, so amazing bit through bread, amazing just like sprinkled into a stir fry. You know, incredibly useful thing to have as a forager. Incredibly delicious. You get a kind of decent sized window to collect it as well. So really I can pick it from kind of mid-February onwards, and then there's places I know I can pick it right up until kind of the end of May. So worth knowing, worth learning, and definitely worth collecting. This is the first of our spring flowers that we're going to talk about that are edible. So springtime's really lovely for collecting flowers because it's a time when lots of plants produce flowers that are edible, and they might be the only part of the plant that is edible through that whole year. So there's this kind of brief ephemeral window of collecting things from, you know, trees and stuff like that. But we've got kind of a few of our kind of classic spring flowers that are edible here as well. So these are primroses, and again we're right in the middle of kind of primrose season, so you'll probably find these in lots of places at this time of year. The thing about primroses is for a long time they were on a kind of protected list. Now they're no longer on the list in Northern Ireland. So the list contains, so there's a kind of government decided list of protected plants that are local to Northern Ireland, and it is good to be aware of them as a forager because there are a few of them that you may come across, and they're protected for a whole myriad of reasons, but mostly because they're endangered, and they're native plants that are no longer kind of really abundant in our country. So we do need to be really aware of that. Primroses were, but no longer are on the list. But I still kind of think about that when I'm going to collect them. And actually I've taken to trying to grow primroses. Now, I'm a notoriously terrible gardener, but I'm determined to have more primroses in my garden. One, because they're really beautiful, but also they're actually very delicious as well. So if I find them in a large patch, and I know there's quite a few here in Crawfordsburn, and I have collected one or two for myself for kind of garnishing things on a salad or whatever, I've never collected lots and lots of them in abundance. And you sometimes see that on social media and stuff, people make like wine and things like that from primrose flowers. You can do that too, but I do recommend you try and find a patch where there's lots and lots of them growing. But like our wild garlic, they take a long time to establish. And if you pick the flowers, it means they don't get pollinated, which means the population doesn't increase. So worth keeping that in mind. But they are such a lovely thing to have, and like I say, they're quite delicious. They're kind of sweet. A lot of flowers can be a little bit bitter. These ones aren't, and they have that beautiful kind of nectar fragrance in them as well. So identifying primroses, really easy. They're only at this time of year, so you get that kind of like, you know, spring little shot of time to find them. They have these quite distinctive kind of ribby textured leaves, and then these beautiful flowers, and these are just kind of like you know, different coloured variation here as well, but mostly you'll find them in that kind of yellow colour. So really tasty. Like I say, if you find them in large numbers, feel free to pick a few and add them to salad, use them to garnish a cake. That's quite classic, you know, people put it on their kind of simnel Easter cake, is to decorate them with primroses. So I'm going to talk really briefly about collecting tree leaves or pine needles for tea. So I collect a lot of different kind of leaf and greens for tea through the year, different types of flowers. Nettles, of course, are a classic kind of tea. Hawthorn leaves make excellent tea. But one I particularly enjoy, and one that's good to look out for in the springtime, is pine needles. So, and this specifically, I'm surrounded here by Scots pine. The one, it has needles. So, and it's these, I mean, these specific things, needles, very, very pointed and distinctive and not flat at all. You can roll them in your fingers. So all pine species have that. Also the attachment. So on Scots pine, they always attach by two at this little base here. So you'll see this all over this kind of piece of branch. They're all attached by two. And sometimes pine is attached by three, sometimes even more. If there are lots and lots coming out, there's a good chance that is larch, or it could be deodar cedar. That's okay, both of those are usable for tea as well, especially larch is quite delicious in the springtime, so you're safe there. And then Scots pine in particular have quite distinctive needles in that they're twisted, so you won't probably be able to see that on camera here. I'll try and take a picture to show you what that looks like. But if you encounter a Scots pine that looks like this with these lovely kind of explosive needles at the end, you should be able to see that little twist in them. So how do you use pine needles? So the best time to collect them is actually a little later in the spring, but you can collect them at any time of year. You want to take the needles off, and if you want to use them for tea, just give them like a little crush or a little break up in your hands to get that kind of lovely kind of piney, citrusy, herbal scent coming in your tea. I absolutely love that. A lot of people think that pine will smell like toilet cleaner, which in my experience it really doesn't. You know, I think that that's quite a synthetic smell of pine. This one is much more interesting. That's much more subtle and nuanced. It's like you know, notes of like basil or coriander, or like much more herbal than pine, like pine cleaner. So I'm collecting this today for tea, so to include in your little pack. So hopefully by now you'll have tried the tea and seen what you think. As well as the pine needles, I'm going to include some beech leaves, so overwintered beech leaves, and they'll be that brown colour, and they add a wee bit of tannin in, and then also some hawthorn leaves, and they'll add in a little bit of brightness, a bit of greenness, as in like green tea kind of flavour. So definitely let me know what you think of the tea. It's something I feel really passionate about. I want to cover this plant really quickly. So this is ground alder. Is another incredibly common weed. It's not particular to any kind of environment. Will grow anywhere there's a bit of undisturbed ground. It likes to be in the sun. It also likes to be among trees, and you'll find it pretty much in any park or any kind of like rural spot in Northern Ireland. It is so common. This one is in our Apiaceae family, and this is a good one to learn to start with in the Apiaceae family. Apiaceae family covers lots and lots of our cultivated, our domesticated plants, including parsley, carrots, parsnips, coriander, lots of our kind of like soft herbs that we would be familiar with. This is in the same family, and why this one's good to start with and good to kind of familiarize yourself with is because lots of Apiaceae family plants are really, really poisonous. So and it contains things like giant hogweed, hemlock, water dropwort, things like that that are very, very common in our in all of our kind of environments around Northern Ireland. but this one is edible. So it's called ground elder, has nothing to do with elder as in elderflower or elderberry. It just has a slight resemblance in its leaf shape, but it's just kind of a nickname really for it. And this is a good one to learn because it has that brilliant flavour of parsley, just like our domesticated parsley or chervil, but it is really easy to identify. So it has these kind of 3 points at the top of leaf shape. These are kind of serrated. It has a little kind of channel running through the middle, so just like celery, so you should be able to feel that. And also it has a lovely kind of slightly sweet smell, so if I crush this up, you'll get that kind of slightly parsley, carrot top smell that you would get from those domesticated plants as well. So behind us here is the most incredible patch of three-cornered leek. So this three-cornered leek, so next to wild garlic, this is definitely our most common wild allium plant. So allium, that's leek and onion and garlic family. And even to the point where people think that they find wild garlic, but it's actually three-cornered leek that they have found. So I'll show you how to tell them apart. So you can see how they grow in this almost like grass-like appearance. And if you're walking past this patch, you might even think that this was some kind of grass, or maybe even bluebells or daffodils or something like that. There's a couple of ways being able to tell that this is definitely three-cornered leek. So three-cornered leek, it's a descriptive name. So if you roll this in your fingers, you'll feel those corners. So it's actually got kind of 3 ridges. So that's your one way of telling it apart. And then the other way is just like our wild garlic, by the smell. So this one has a beautiful sweet onion smell, much more like scallions, much more like fresh oniony smell. And it's hard for me to kind of pick a favourite, but I really love three-cornered leek. So uses for this, just like scallions. It's also lovely in a salad. You could use it raw, but is amazing at cooking. So any way you would use onions, which is such a huge amount of ways, you can use three-cornered leek. But I'll very often put this into like a curry, or I'll chop it up and use it to sprinkle on top of like fried rice or something like that. So really super versatile. So this is the flower stem. It also has 3 corners. So again, the untrained eye might think that this was like a white bluebell, and those do exist of course, but a little bit more of closer observation, you'll be able to tell that this is actually a three-cornered leek flower. So one by the stem, but also the flowers have a little kind of green line on each of the petals as well, so that's a way of telling too. So these are my favourite edible flowers by far, even out of the sweet flowers. These have the most amazing fresh onion flavour, like quite subtle compared to the leaves. So these are amazing to like scatter on top of things, and they will crisp up on top of a pizza, and they just taste like so incredible. So we're not too far away. Maybe by the time you come and visit Crawfordsburn, this will be a whole wash of flowers, and you'll be able to collect lots and lots of these. And this is gorse. Of course, one of our most prevalent, most common wildflowers. Grows absolutely everywhere. Again, not particular to Crawfordsburn. You'll find this growing in any hedgerow in Northern Ireland. One of our really common pea family plants. So this is Fabaceae family, which when I found that for the first time, it really surprised me. But then I discovered that family is absolutely enormous and has trees as well as shrubs and vines and everything in it. It's a massive family. But one trait they do share in abundance is actually the shape of their flowers. So if anybody has grown like sweet peas, or is familiar with laburnum or wisteria, those are all Fabaceae plants. They all have this kind of very kind of distinct flower, so slightly sweet and kind of vegetal in flavour as well. So because they have a kind of neutral vegetable flavour, means they're really versatile and things. And very often I'll collect these to sprinkle on top of cakes at this time of year. I'll also use them to just kind of like decorate any kind of plate of food that I have, because they're so beautiful and they taste really good. Worth remembering about gorse, they're obviously super thorny, so best to collect wearing gloves. If you're caught without gloves, which is me very often, Wait until they're kind of coming out to the top and then just pull them out kind of towards this end bit, and they tend to be a little less spiny. They also have this kind of papery covering on them, so you want to take that off before eating them because it's kind of unpleasant, which means of course it's a little bit of hard work, but definitely worth picking because it's really easy to collect them. You can get lots in one place. You can make lots of other things with these, including syrup. I've seen people make like jam from it. You can also make wine. We made wine a couple of years ago and it was not very nice, I must confess. I've made nicer wines, but it could have been that I had maybe a bad batch. So if you're keen on winemaking, you can definitely have a go with gorse. But I prefer to use them just as they are, just raw and delicious, and just like a beautiful little bit of sunshine on your food as well. So you can see the weather has changed. It is now more typical spring weather in Northern Ireland. It is absolutely chucking it down, but that's okay. We're talking about seaweed, we're beside the sea, we're probably going to get wet anyway. So we're going to discuss a few different seaweeds that you can find here. And what's really useful to know about seaweeds, especially if you're starting out to forage, is that all seaweeds that are growing, and by growing I mean attached to the rocks or attached to a stone or something like that along the side of the coastline, none of those seaweeds are toxic. So it means that there is a really easy approach to collecting seaweed. You can just go and try everything, see how you feel about it. Even if it is a bit too tough to chop into as it is, you can put that into stock, or you can use that as a starting point for something. So definitely include some seaweeds in your life. So this seaweed is serrated wrack, and you can see here that it is still attached, and that's its like little foot, little claw that grasps onto stones and onto the rocks and things like that. So this is what you want to pick if you're collecting this to eat, something that's still clearly alive. And you can see the difference in this and the kelp as well. It's a lot more luscious, a lot more kind of almost like juicy looking at a stretch of the word to describe it, but you can see that this is still alive and growing well. So serrated wrack, we talked about descriptive names already. This one's called serrated wrack, sometimes called toothed wrack as well, because of these kind of like little spikes, little serrations along the side of the stem here. So pretty distinctive. This one is probably not one of my favourite ones to eat, but will impart brilliant flavour into like a dashi or a stock or a soup. It also is the one kind of very commonly used for like seaweed baths as well. So I don't always forage for things to eat, sometimes I'll forage for things like that. So if you wanted to gather some serrated wrack on the beach, you can collect this really easily from the shoreline, and you don't have to worry about it still being alive because you're not going to be eating it. And yeah, so this one is really great for using in the bath, makes your skin feel really soft. Also has a lovely seaside smell as well in the bath, which you may or might not enjoy depending on what way you're inclined. I actually love that smell. I love that kind of sense of feeling it by the seaside, so that is right up my street. So gather serrated wrack for that. But it is edible as well, so I haven't probably experimented with it as much as I probably should have. If I was picking it to eat, to try, I'd probably pick it younger than this, a bit smaller. This is quite a mature species of it. I'd want to pick something that's a wee bit kind of smaller and more tender, but this one is edible as well. So moving on, this one is channeled wrack. So this is one that likes to grow kind of closest to the beach. So you'll find it right at the top of the rocks. And it's called channeled wrack because of this little channel here, almost like celery, this one. So this one is actually one I really like to eat, even though it looks like it's got quite a leathery appearance. This one actually cooks up really nicely and will go a little bit more tender on cooking. It also pickles really nicely, especially if you pick it when it's young like this. Again, incredibly abundant. You'll find this on shorelines of beaches, but you'll also find it along loch sides and things like that too, right up at the top of like piers, at the top of the rocks. So really easy to find, and pretty tasty. Like, doesn't have as strong a seaside flavour as say something like dulse, but does have a really good texture. Similar to this one, and you might find that these are quite close in appearance as well. This one is curled wrack. or spiral rack, it's sometimes called as well. So it's called that. Again, a descriptive name. You might just be able to see at the edges it's starting to turn up and curl, and that's where that spiral rack name comes from. Again, treat it in the same way. You can pickle this, you can fry it, you can chop it up and add it to your stock or your soup. You can make a tea out of this. You can do all kinds of things with it. Again, it can be a little bit leathery, but if you can find young species of it as well, it actually is really pleasant to eat. I find when this is going into its kind of reproductive period, which this almost is, it produces these little bladders at the edge. These are full of kind of like a gel, and those are actually really delicious. It sounds kind of, maybe sounds a little bit kind of unpleasant, but actually they're pretty delicious, really, really salty, and they're a nice kind of little seaside snack. This one is gutweed. So this is our green seaweed, and this one is a really, really common one you'll find growing pretty much on any shoreline. This one it's called gutweed because of its scientific name, which is intestinalis, intestines, because of that kind of shape. So you'll find a couple of different types of gutweed. This one, which is really ribbony and wide, and then one that's much, much finer and is kind of more, looks more kind of close together, and it will come up more kind of like a little bunch. Both have really, really good flavour. This is actually one I quite like to eat raw. I'll even eat it still at the beach. Just be conscious of doing that because sometimes they're a little bit gritty. But if you really, really want to taste the seaweed, sometimes I do. I'll go and dip it into the sea to taste it. But this one's really tender. You don't have to worry about, you know, leathery toughness in this one. You can see there, it just kind of is already like a really soft texture, almost like lettuce. This is in the same family as sea lettuce, which is exactly the same colour as this. Very similar texture, but comes in big sheets as well. Also a really good one to find. Great flavour, cooks up really nicely. You can deep fry this, you can dry it and keep it as a seasoning. Works really, really well in bread. Really, really delicious. Absolutely love gutweed. Probably one of my favourites to collect. And then finally, we'll talk about this, and this is one actually I don't find too often, and this unfortunately we did find like around on the beach, but it actually looks pretty good. This is carrageen, or carrageenan is its kind of name that it's known as well, which is the extract that comes from carrageen. Carrageen is best known for its properties of setting. So carrageen will set a pudding, just like gelatin or agar. And I've made quite a few puddings actually with carrageen, and it provides a really, really beautiful set. It's very, very similar to using gelatin and things like that. It has like a slightly taste of the sea, so you need to be careful and only use a very small amount of it. I would recommend actually that if you can't find this already growing on rocks, to order this online. There's lots and lots of companies that sell it for not very much if you want to try this out. There's a really classic recipe from Ballymaloe, and they make a carrageen set pudding with milky cream in it, and it's really, really incredible. But you can also use this to make like really amazing like vegan desserts and things like that as well. So really, really beautiful find. It's also like a stunning seaweed. Like I said, this is our red seaweed, which is the same family that dulse is in too. So if you see kind of this colour of seaweed, you can know that that's in the red seaweed family. So yeah, you can see quite a big vast array. This is actually just a small shot of the seaweeds that we have growing on the island of Ireland. We have so many, so I really recommend that you go out and try them and experiment with them.